Hey everybody, this is attorney Joe Delamater here with the law firm of Razmich and Delamater. I want to talk to you a little bit today about juvenile criminal offenses in Indiana, because I think it's very important to recognize that kids charged with juvenile delinquency acts are actually completely different than those who are charged as adults with adult criminal acts. First, I want to get a little bit of language out of the way because there's some differences. When you are a juvenile, you're not charged with a crime. You are alleged to have committed a delinquent act. A delinquent act is different from a crime. They're not the same thing. And if ultimately there is a conviction afterwards, if the child is found to have committed this act, he's not convicted or she is not convicted of a crime. Instead, it's an adjudication on their record as a juvenile and does not count as a conviction. It's not something that would show up in a background check. It's not something that counts as a conviction for an enhancement down the road. So juvenile offense is very, very, very different as far as the immediate ramifications. Some other things that are important. The juvenile court is going to have jurisdiction of people up until the age of 21. Now, effectively speaking, sometimes juvenile courts don't maintain the jurisdiction until 21. Sometimes they'll go ahead and let jurisdiction go at 18 because they're otherwise an adult. And if you commit something after the age of 18 that's a criminal act, you'll be charged as an adult at that point. So while the court can maintain jurisdiction until 21, they don't always do that. Now, one of the things that I wanted to also talk about is there's a big difference between being charged as juvenile and being charged as an adult, like we mentioned, as far as the punishments go. So when are the times that kids can actually be charged as adults? Because you will see on the news from time to time, maybe a kid shoots somebody accidentally or intentionally, and they get charged in an adult court. So in Indiana, we have what's called direct file offenses, and we have waiver offenses. So first, let's do the direct file ones. If you are at the age of 16 to 18 years of age, so a little 2-year window, but you're a minor there, and you commit any of the following acts, that's going to be murder or attempted murder. If you're alleged to have committed kidnapping or rape. We used to have a crime called criminal deviant conduct that's been repealed, but if that were charged against you, or if there were carjacking, which is no longer a crime anymore because it was subsumed under robbery. So robbery, if it's committed with a deadly weapon or if it injures somebody. And then there are felony offenses for carrying a handgun without a license. And then there's this other statute called children and firearms. And there's a lot of little nuances in there, but in general, just think to yourself, kids and guns, if it's a felony, may very well result in a direct file case. So any of those cases that we just went over will be filed directly into adult court, completely bypassing the juvenile system, bypassing the juvenile remedies. And if you're direct filed as an adult, the law treats you as an adult. And that's a conviction on your record. That's potentially going to prison with all the big boys. It is not ideal. Whatever you can do to avoid a direct file is good as far as looking out for that minor child's best interest. Then there are the waiver offenses. These are the offenses where a child is alleged to be a juvenile delinquent, but the state of Indiana requests through the prosecutor's office that the charges actually go to adult court. Here there's this process called waiver. In other words, whether the juvenile court, are they going to waive their jurisdiction over this minor child? And there's a few ways that they can do that. Under the sections of the juvenile code, we've got a section 2 waiver, which is kind of a catch-all. If you're age 14 plus and you commit what's otherwise considered an aggravated or a heinous felony, and if the court finds that you're beyond the rehabilitation of the juvenile system. So what you might expect there is if you've been in the juvenile system for a while and you're just not getting it, but you get charged with a somewhat high-level case, there's a possibility the juvenile court will say, you know what, we'll wash our hands of you, and they'll send you on to adult court. Section 3 waiver is for drug-related felonies, and basically think of it as dealing and manufacturing in the hard drugs. So not marijuana, and we're not talking about possession offenses, okay? But dealing or manufacturing of cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, things like that, those major drug offenses, those are able to be waived into adult court if the child alleged in these acts is 16 or above, okay? We've got Section 4, which is murder. Now, murder is an interesting one because I told you before, murder was a direct file, right? But that's only a direct file if the kid is 16 years of age. What happens if a 13-year-old shoots somebody? So murder can be waived between the ages of 12 to 16. And anything that happens before the age of 12, God forbid somebody under 12 gets in trouble, that will always remain the jurisdiction of the juvenile courts. So between the ages of 12 to 16, they can be sent off to adult court unless the juvenile court finds that it would be better to have them served in juvenile court. I should mention now, and it's a theme throughout all pending juvenile offenses, the best interests of not just society, but the child itself are an important theme. And you might show up in juvenile court and you hear the court say, I find that it's in the best interests of the child that this case be brought. And so they're actually not just going to look at the consequences of the kid's actions on the community, but also on the child itself. Are we going to mess this child up by allowing them to go to adult court? Or are they going to get the treatment that they need there in adult court? You've got Section 5, which is another kind of catch-all category. So Section 5, waivers. We're still talking about waiver of jurisdiction here. If you get charged with any level 1 through level 4 felony, or if you get charged with a level 5 felony reckless homicide or a level 5 felony involuntary manslaughter. And I keep saying charged, but charging is the wrong word because you get charged with crimes, you get alleged to have committed juvenile delinquent offenses. So please forgive any of those little inconsistencies in my language there. But if a juvenile case is brought against a minor and they are age 16 plus and it's a level 1 through 4 felony, or those 2 level 5s that I just mentioned, voluntary manslaughter and reckless homicide, those are potential waiver offenses too, off to adult court. And once waived, always waived is something to consider. If a child has been waived to adult court before and they do get charged with another new juvenile offense, there's a very, very high likelihood that they'll go ahead and end up in adult court from then on out. So that's kind of it. Now, juvenile offenses are just as important as a criminal offense. Just because you're not necessarily looking at the same level of punishments doesn't mean it's not important. And it's also important to know that in Indiana, the law does qualify juvenile delinquency offenses as civil proceedings, but the Indiana Code adopts all the rules of evidence, all the rules of criminal procedure. And so you treat this just like a criminal case. And so for somebody like me, a defense attorney, I'm looking at these juvenile cases the same way I would an adult case. In other words, can the state prove these allegations against the child beyond a reasonable doubt? I hope you found this video interesting. If you or someone that you know finds themselves in trouble with the juvenile justice system in Indiana, it's very important to know these little nuances. I hope this is informative to you. And if you have any further questions, you can always call Razumich and Delmont. Thanks, guys.